The Ethereum L2, the DeFi chain, the bridge to Hyperliquid, all these different titles people use to refer to Arbitrum. However, does it go deeper than that? In today's video, we'll dive into the current state of Arbitrum, how it differentiates itself from the ecosystems that are currently launching today, the massive growth opportunities it faces, and of course, why by the end of this video, you yourself might be saying, Arbitrum Everywhere. Let's jump into it. So today, Arbitrum is a combination of Arbitrum 1 and the Arbitrum stack. Starting with Arbitrum 1, it's the flagship DeFi chain, as we mentioned earlier, boasting the most TVL of all L2s, and currently standing as one of the top chains across all of crypto, with the highest inflows and outflows of any ecosystem. Many popular apps call Arbitrum 1 home, including Aave, Uniswap, GMX, Robinhood, and even if you want to count, the Hyperliquid piece to it, Hyperliquid. The Arbitrum stack, or Arbitrum Orbit, allows anyone to spin up their own chain using the same technology that powers Arbitrum 1, but with any modification that they might need. So in this case, that might be a custom gas token, that might be tweaking the chain for higher throughput, that could be changing the data availability layers, allowing devs to write code in Rust in addition to Solidity. You name it, the chain can probably do it. It's fully customizable from the bottom up. Some examples of apps that have built their own Arbitrum stack chain include Plume, ApeChain, Blackbird, Rhea, and soon Robinhood. More on that in a bit. But Hunter, why does any of this matter, right? Arbitrum has some wins. So what? Well, this is where Arbitrum differentiates itself. Starting with the Barbell. Arbitrum is the only ecosystem in crypto that has the ability to say that it has a top chain and a top stack. And the reason why it's important is because it gives the Arbitrum ecosystem the unique ability to follow the developer alongside their entire growth journey. Starting from potentially a very, very small project on Arbitrum 1, could even be like an indie team, to again, potentially becoming the next breakout app on the iOS App Store, backed by their own Arbitrum stack chain, onboarding thousands or even millions of users. Now, you might be saying, Hunter, maybe you could say that about anything. Well, Robinhood is probably going to be the best example of that, right? We call it the launch and migrate model. You essentially start on Arbitrum 1 because you can launch right away, you can go to market immediately, and tap into all this liquidity instantly if needed. And on your growth journey, through figuring out, okay, what matters the most to my users and how do I make this development environment conducive to just a platform that works incredibly well without people needing to worry about it being crypto, that's where Offchain Labs, the Arbitrum ecosystem, that's where all these different years of developing a chain ecosystem, the tech, the community, all of that comes into play because it's not something that you can buy. That's not something someone can launch tomorrow. You can't launch learned experience, and you can't launch the ability to essentially work with a team throughout their entire growth cycle into where they potentially become the next breakout app or the next thing to disrupt industries, right? I mean, we hear Robinhood and Vlad particularly talking about it all day now on Twitter, especially if you're on there. He's essentially saying DeFi, TradFi, it'll all just be finance. Tokenization will eat the world. These really, really broad statements, that stuff that he believes that we will do with essentially Arbitrum rails. So just to recap it, the launch and migrate model is very, very specific to Arbitrum because it's the only ecosystem to offer that top chain, top stack combination and carry the developer all the way from the beginning of their journey to the end of it. Simple as that. Number two is natural resources. In this case, it's essentially revenue that can be generated from Arbitrum's block space and execution environments. So jumping into the top three, number one, of course, is transaction fees on Arbitrum 1. The one thing to keep in mind is that because Arbitrum is an L2, it does have about a 93% profit margin on the transaction fees, whereas an L1 will have much, much less because usually they're paying validators for security through token issuance. This is very important if you're running a business because at the end of the day, you want to make money, not lose it. The second natural resource is time boost fees. Now, this is a transaction ordering policy that allows for people to pay to have their transaction on Arbitrum 1 included much quicker from the sequencer. Now, this is something that as a user, you won't really notice, but as a market maker or as someone that is just trying to find opportunities or catch arbitrage between centralized exchanges and decentralized exchanges, this may be of value to you. But in this case, this generates additional fees to the transaction fees that Arbitrum 1 already has. And in this case, the user doesn't feel that added bump in fee because these market makers, the people that are using time boosts, they're not competing with the users, they're competing with each other. And part of the reason why we like it is because it's a little better than a priority gas auction method, because in that case, you do have bots, you do have market makers competing with users directly at the gas level. So just something to keep in mind. Number three, and probably one of the cooler ones I think, is Arbitrum stack fees. So this is 10% of chain profits, but only applies to Arbitrum stack chains that don't settle to Arbitrum 1. So in this case, we're talking about the Robinhoods, we're talking about the Blackbirds, we're talking about any Arbitrum stack chain that does not settle to Arbitrum 1 must pay 10% of its profits back to the Arbitrum DAO. But where's all this money going? Well, I did kind of say it at the end there. This actually goes straight to the Arbitrum DAO treasury. And that's the third way Arbitrum differentiates itself, the DAO. Now, I realize many people have their doubts in the DAOs and how they work, but I'll talk about what's very crucial about the DAO and why Arbitrum's is different. So Arbitrum is one of the few DAOs in crypto that actually has given ownership of both the main chain, Arbitrum 1, and its treasury to ARB holders, which means that if you're an ARB holder, you have the end say of what happens with the chain itself and the money within the treasury, which happens to be one of the biggest treasuries in crypto. But given the current structure of how the Arbitrum DAO works, that means that the ARB holders in this case can vote on what they want to spend their treasury money on. In a vacuum, this may not sound that interesting, but if you consider that the Arbitrum DAO is receiving all this different revenue from the methods mentioned earlier, then you'll realize that as those different forms of revenue grow, as more Arbitrum stack chains follow that launch and migrate model that Robinhood did come online, as more time boost fees come into play, and as Arbitrum 1 as a chain expands its capacity with more people transacting on it and more transaction fees coming back into the DAO, you realize it's a lot of money that'll come into the hands and under the power and control of ARB token holders. And that's where reinvestment back into the ecosystem matters, and growing the economy is vital to making Arbitrum essentially the biggest chain ecosystem in all of crypto. And the cool part is that this is kind of already happening. And real quick, I'll give some examples of some DAO programs that are already reinvesting back into the ecosystem. Number one is STEP, which invests a portion of the DAO treasury into low-risk liquid assets to earn yield. It's essentially caused folks like BlackRock and Franklin Templeton to onboard through a governance forum to make sure that they were taking part of this. Another kind of interesting, side effect of being able to have ownership over your own treasury and running these different programs. The AGV, which is a gaming-focused venture fund that returns profits to the DAO instead of just giving out grants that fizzle away. And if you guys are familiar with gaming in any capacity, then you know that honestly tends to be what happens with most crypto ecosystems. They give out grants, the team uses it for a little while, and then they go away. But in this case, if we're investing instead, then it's a much better risk/return than just giving out free money and expecting nothing in return. And of course, lastly, we have the DeFi fund, aka DRIP. This actually deploys treasury funds into DeFi to attract new builders and grow the Arbitrum ecosystem. So in essence, Arbitrum is poised to be a revenue generation machine with no end in sight. Consider that Dubai was once in a very similar situation. Yes, Dubai. Given a relatively small amount of oil, natural resources, and strategically reinvested back into its own economy to build up their own infrastructure, trade, and tourism to what it is today, you could almost say that Arbitrum is a digital Dubai. Of course, without all the labor and human rights concerns. If we're being honest. So whether it be backing Robinhood's mandate to power all of finance, whether it be being the rails for Blackbird as they take over the food industry, or even being your favorite place to keep your funds because any relevant perp DEX will use Arbitrum to source liquidity from, including Hyperliquid, Arbitrum will quite literally be everywhere and allowing its ecosystem to benefit from its presence. And that's the most important part. That's why we say Arbitrum is a digital sovereign nation. That's why we say Arbitrum is a neutral land of liquidity. And that is why we say Arbitrum everywhere. What do you guys think? What excites you most about Arbitrum? Did you have any interest of anything that I said? Let me know in the comments below. I'll catch you on the next one. Peace out.